Chapter 15. Zekalov Quilamek Shilal awoke to the dawning of a new day with a wicked smile as he emerged from the Force dream he had just experienced with Anakin Skywalker. He could feel through the Force remnants of the emotions emanating from his Jedi foe. Anakin was greatly distressed and would undoubtedly devise a rescue effort in a pitiful attempt to save his Padawan Ahsoka. The Sith apprentice knew for certain that regardless if she was rescued, she would still die by his own hand sooner or later. It was this that he solemnly vowed. Zekalov knew the price for failure, and failing this mission was not an option. The 12-year-old boy sat up and stretched stiff muscles and then slowly stood to get himself washed up and clothed. He went to the fresher after grabbing a clean pair of clothes, relieved to be temporarily rid of his Sith apprentice attire, and continued to think back on the Force dream. The young Kalish was proud with how smoothly he led Skywalker into believing the Jedi were not really what they appeared to be, and took the advantage to play upon the fact that his master Count Dooku had enslaved him to the ways of the Sith. Zekalov did a masterful job at making himself out to be a helpless victim and an unwilling agent in the grand scheme of things. He felt within the fabrics of the Force that General Skywalker was in great doubt and was in fact questioning the Jedi's ideals. Perfect. The young Sith apprentice also sensed from Ahsoka's human master that he genuinely despised slavery and was more than willing to find a way to help him in that regard. Zekalov had to admit that Skywalker took him by surprise by claiming he would find the truth concerning what happened to the Kalish race. Why in the fiery hells of Mustafar would this particular Jedi even care? The Kalish child couldn't help but wonder if Skywalker would turn on the Jedi if he knew the Jedi Order was responsible for the many atrocities wrought upon the galaxy that they so carefully and intricately concealed. The Jedi were ruthless and devious. They hid their true nature by making the galaxy believe they were the caring peacekeepers, willing to protect and serve the common public, when in reality they were just the opposite: kidnappers, liars, bloodthirsty, warmongering murderers. They proved their true nature by tearing the galaxy apart with war and subjugating worlds with their blatantly abrasive actions and their callous lies and propaganda. Zekalov was also quite aware of how the Jedi kidnapped Force-sensitive infants and separated families. The boy had fallen victim to that very thing, albeit briefly, and hated and despised the Jedi since his first encounter with one back on Kali as an innocent child, practically a toddler. Well, at least he was considered so in the eyes of his now deceased mother. He closed his reptilian eyes and swayed on his feet from an unexpected flashback. He was about 4 or 5 years old, and his mother was holding him on her lap. She was stroking his head lovingly and speaking softly as she told him stories about his bold and courageous father. Zekalov's mother Kitna made Grievous out to be the greatest hero the galaxy had ever known. Zekalov giggled cutely at what his mother said next. "My sweet Zekalov. You look just like your father, Shilal. And I know someday you will become as great a warrior as him." She showed him a hollow picture of what his Kalish father looked like before the accidental explosion that transformed Shilal into General Grievous. The small child held the frame in chubby little hands, and he stared intently at the picture, trying to engrave the image of his father to his long-term memory. His lower lip began to tremble and tears squeezed out of his eyes. He dropped the picture and buried his face in the crook of his mother's neck and cried out his hurt. His mother rubbed his back soothingly and whispered words of comfort. "Oh Zekalov, everything's going to be okay. Your father hasn't met you yet, but he will soon. You must trust me on this." She gently began to pry the child away so she could wipe the tears from his bright, golden-hued irises. The small child sniffled and the boy's breathing hitched in a clear indication that he was going to resume crying again, but he didn't at what she said next. "My dear little one, don't be sad. Your daddy isn't here because he's fighting in a war." "Why, Mommy? Why can't Daddy come home?" "Your daddy is protecting us. He can't come home again until the evil ones he's fighting have lost and are all gone." "When will he come home?" Kitna's eyes turned sad, although she smiled for Zekalov's benefit and tried to hide her own depressive feelings from the child. "I don't know, dear one. I want to think he'll come home soon." She ran loving fingers through his soft ebony hair and smiled. "Oh Zekalov, I know wherever your daddy is, that he loves you very much." The small boy was curled up on her lap and cuddled with his mother and sniffled as the last of his tears ebbed away. He rested his head against her chest and felt sleepy and soaked in his mother's warmth as she began to sing him a lullaby. Midway through, her song was interrupted by a knock at the door. Kitna didn't move to answer it right away and met Zikalov's eyes with her own confused ones. Who would be knocking on our door at this hour? Zikalov glanced out of a window and saw that the early evening had melted into night. This was usually about the time that his mother tucked him into bed. The flashback ended there and he growled in disappointment when he couldn't recover all of the memory. Zikalov placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head. His mother had dearly loved him. Knowing that brought tears to his eyes. Although he couldn't entirely remember, he knew that the Jedi were responsible for her unwarranted demise and he wanted to avenge her death. There were some times that he sensed his father wished to do the same. Zikalov's rage and hate arose, bubbling up inside his chest, but he closed his eyes knowing this was neither the time nor place to give heed to such feelings. The Jedi were evil. Plain and simple. He didn't need his father or even Count Dooku to tell him that. The boy saw the truth for himself with each passing day and embraced it wholeheartedly. He and his father wanted to bring true peace and justice to the galaxy. The only way that would ever happen was if the Jedi Order was completely decimated and the Republic defeated. Zikalov's sole purpose in life for the time being was wiping out the Jedi Order. He had no other desire. It wasn't just about revenge, it was also about justice. He had come to see both revenge and justice as nearly the same thing. The Jedi were going to pay for their crimes. Many worlds were rallying to the separatist cause as they witnessed how ruthlessly the Jedi razed capital cities and wrought destruction upon the surface of every world they conquered. Anakin currently believed that he, the Jedi, and the Republic were the good guys and that rather than conquering worlds they were liberating them from the supposed oppression of the separatists. The separatists in all truth protected the worlds that asked them for safety and for humanitarian aid. The only times that the separatists had to forcefully conquer a world was to protect the neighboring systems seeking their help. Sometimes sacrifices had to be made, and although they themselves could be considered cold and ruthless, the means justified the ends for the greater good. Why did worlds have to be part of the Republic? The answer was simple. The Jedi were the backbone upon which the Republic stood, and according to their philosophy, the galaxy would be a peaceful place if every world was united. They were completely decimating many species' ways of life by dominating their cultures and beliefs. Those that were loyal to the separatist cause and did not want to belong to the Republic were invaded and forced down to their knees as the Jedi stripped them of their liberty and their freedom. The Jedi, as well as the Republic as a whole, were in fact a severely communist organization. They shaped the galaxy in the way that they believed to be right. It made Zikalov sick. The son of Grievous believed in freedom, but he knew the people still needed to be led by a strong, devout leader that had the people's best interests in mind. Zikalov had seen enough of the Republic's main leader, Chancellor Palpatine, on the HoloNet and hated the man. He already knew that the separatist worlds he had already visited with Count Dooku secretly preferred that General Grievous be the next leader due to their blatant distrust and wariness concerning the fact that the Sith held the same Force power that the Jedi had, regardless that each faction used the Force differently. The common folk by no means wanted to be ruled by any Force users. Zikalov was rather surprised that Dooku was not attentive or sensitive enough to pick up on the subtle hints given by the separatist people. If he did, he didn't seem to care. When Dooku was not present in a room, the separatist people's internal dislike for the Jedi and Sith alike screamed at him through the fabrics of the Force. He laughed now at the memory of when he sensed before embarking on this current mission that his Sith master believed that he had been responsible for fueling Zikalov's hate for the Jedi while the boy had been in his care. The Sith apprentice carefully concealed the truth from the old man and made the Count believe that he had indeed been utterly brainwashed by him. In all truth, Zikalov absorbed his master's knowledge and used it to fuel his own rage. It was true that over the course of a few years, the Kalish boy had learned that hate strengthened him and made him powerful. He didn't just hate the Jedi, he hated his master too, and the boy was awaiting the fateful day when he would finally be permitted the chance to rid the galaxy of him. Grievous swore to his son that he would help to free him from the Sith. There was one obstacle in the way, however. Namely Sith Lord Sidious, who had yet to reveal his true identity. Dooku's master was a mystery, and the boy was determined to discover who the true Sith Lord really was. He felt it was detrimental to the survival of both himself and his father. But Zekalov decided he would worry about such things later, when the time came. Zekalov paused for a moment in what he was doing to look at himself in the mirror. He couldn't help but notice how quickly his childish features had begun to change. His ears had grown pointier and more pronounced. The tusks on his face had grown longer, as had his 4-digit clawed hands. His claws had actually gotten quite sharper, and his father recently had to instruct him on how to clip them to keep them well maintained in order for them to keep growing and so he wouldn't cause injury to himself. He was maturing. He wasn't going to be a child much longer. He was going to be 13 in 3 standard galactic months. On Kali, his people would throw a great celebration and perform a ritual ceremony for reaching that milestone for a Kalish child like him. He would be graduating from a child to a warrior teen. Usually by Kalish custom he would be given the elite honor of leading a hunting party into Kali's dense forests and jungles to slay a number of beasts for his ritual feast. Zekalov sighed sadly and stared at his reflection forlornly. He would probably never be granted such an honor. The growing boy sensed that his father wished to honor his rite of passage by returning to Kali for that particular purpose. Zekalov doubted that Dooku would ever sanction such a personal retreat due to the current demands of the war. The son of Grievous longed to return to his home world. He hadn't lived there for very long, but he knew the people from his village still thought of him. His father said as much. Grievous was sure to keep in contact with their planet from time to time, and that was one of the reports he had always gleaned from the citizens there. By the age of 16, he would be viewed by his people as an actual adult. That was usually the age that a Kalish would take his first mate. Zekalov shuddered, disgusted at the thought. He was nowhere near ready for that. A childish mentally, he would undoubtedly outgrow the older he lived. Zekalov finished his morning ritual and left the fresher. There were a few important things he had to do today that were on his agenda. The first and foremost was successfully constructing his lightsaber. He would have to meditate to do that, and it was something he wasn't overly fond of since his encounter with Master Yoda a couple years back. It was probably one of the only ways he would ever be able to get his weapon in proper working order though, so he had to do it. Zekalov knew he was safe as long as he didn't use the light side of the Force. He remembered learning that lesson well enough. Zekalov sensed that his father was not currently within their housing unit. He had no doubt that his father would return soon. He ordered Senti 7 to guard the premises and for the 4 battle droids to power down and recharge. The boy sat down on the floor cross-legged and closed his eyes, soaking in the quiet peace. He leveled his breathing and relaxed his body as well as his mind. About 5 minutes later he was finally able to empty his mind of any negative thought processes and breathed slowly and deeply. Once he had found his calm center, he reached out to the dark side of the Force and immediately regretted it. Ahsoka was awakened even now. She was currently using the Force to discreetly search for his Force signature. Zekalov was so thankful that Dooku taught him how to shield his mind and mask his Force presence. It was going to take a bit of effort for the boy to accomplish both things at once while he worked on using the Force to construct his lightsaber, but his merciless master had made sure that Zekalov was well trained and competent enough to multitask. He submerged himself in the Force and levitated every piece that was to comprise the lightsaber hilt and intricate inner workings and sensed them hovering about 2 feet in front of his face. The red lightsaber crystal that Dooku had provided him for this mission was only temporary. He would embark to Korriban for his first Sith trial and retrieve his own lightsaber crystal from a cave system near the valley where the Sith tombs were located after his mission to terminate Ahsoka Tano was met with complete success. Zekalov knit his eyebrows together in deep concentration as he pictured every piece, every nut and bolt, to the casing of the lightsaber hilt itself. It was like solving a puzzle, and the boy was determined to do it right. He realized he had made the mistake of trying to construct the lightsaber without the aid of the Force while with his father, and perhaps that was the reason why he had been unsuccessful. He was vaguely aware that his father had returned and was standing awestruck. Zekalov allowed himself a half-smile and further concentrated. General Grievous was dumbfounded as he witnessed the multiple lightsaber pieces floating in midair, many of which were slowly coming together to form one of the greatest weapons the galaxy had ever known. He slowly and quietly placed the small bag of groceries on the table, never once taking his fascinated eyes off of the spectacle. Small beads of sweat began to drip down the side of his face as he put all of his effort into the correct construction of his lightsaber and used much of his strength to stay force-shielded from Padawan Tano. Zekalov saw in his mind's eye the correct sequencing of the pieces and used the Force to guide each one to its proper place. The sound of metal sliding across each other and the small clinking of the nuts and bolts screwing into place filled the air. Soon it was finished, and Zekalov felt the newly constructed lightsaber gently lower from the air to his awaiting hand. He smiled, knowing that he succeeded, and was about to open his eyes, but the Force drew him further into meditation, and the suppressed memory he so desperately sought to recover returned in clear detail. Unbidden, his mind was pulled deeply into the past, and a shudder ran through Zekalov as the end of the last flashback he recently had resumed where it left off. His mother stood carefully with him in her arms and gently placed him down in the armchair where she had been reclining in. She went to answer the door and opened it. The boy cuddled with a stuffed animal that resembled that of an Ewok and listened intently to the conversation that was taking place. "Hello, can I help you?" "I am hoping that you can. May I please come in?" Zekalov saw his mother nod slightly and open the door further to allow a hooded female figure into their humble abode. His mother seemed a little tense, and the young child was curious as to why. The stranger lowered her hood, and Zekalov saw that she was Kalish. He felt uncomfortable that this woman was so intrigued by him. This strange female kept staring at him to the point that he shrank down in his mother's large, plush recliner and averted his eyes to look at the floor as he clutched his stuffed animal tightly in his small fists and hugged it to his chest, a clear indication that he was becoming distressed. Kitna moved between Zekalov and the Kalish woman, shielding her child from the stranger. "What can I help you with?" "My name is Telariel. I have been informed that your son is Force-sensitive. I've been sent here by the Jedi Council regarding this." Kitna's stance shifted and changed from guarded to protective. "What does that mean?" "It means the Jedi Council wishes to take your son and train him to be a Jedi back on Coruscant." Kitna glared at the traitorous Kalish-turned-Jedi. "Have you not forgotten what befell our people due to the Jedi's arrogance and betrayal? Have you no honor or any regard for your own people?" Telariel sighed and shook her head. "My allegiance has always been with the Kalish, but the Jedi are not and have never been at fault for the enslavement of our race." "Lies. The Jedi sided with our enemy, the Hux, and the Jedi allowed them to enslave and starve us. Or do you not remember your history?" Kitna hissed in rage and backed away from the accursed Jedi scum. "Your son must come with me. If he does not, other Jedi will come for him. It is in everyone's best interest that your son be brought before the council by one of his own kind. Now if you will kindly stand aside." Telariel moved closer with her lightsaber hilt firmly grasped in her hand. Kitna had tears forming in her eyes and growled angrily at the traitor. "You are not taking my son. He belongs here, with his people. I am not asking. He will come with me." Telariel took another step forward. Feeling hopelessly trapped and fearing for her son's safety, Kitna did what any loving mother would do in the face of the kidnapping of her child. She grabbed a Shoni spear and got into a fighting stance. She glanced back at Zekalov and spoke firmly to him. "Hide under that blanket, Zekalov, and cover your ears." The frightened child obeyed his mother and threw a blanket over his head. Kitna stared the Jedi down and growled fiercely. "Don't make me kill you, Telariel. Do the smart thing, and leave." "I'm afraid I can't do that. Your son is very special. He must be protected, and the Jedi can teach him how to harness his great power. My son is staying with me. Kitna narrowed her eyes dangerously. You have no choice in the matter. Kitna lowered the spear in what appeared to be resignation and looked as if she were going to collapse to the ground in grief. She whispered to the Jedi, "Let me say goodbye to my son." Telariel nodded silently and clipped her lightsaber hilt back to her belt, believing that the mother had finally accepted the gravity of the situation and stood by quietly watching the mother and child. Kitna leaned down and picked up her child still wrapped in the soft orange and black striped blanket and gently pulled the blanket back to reveal Zikalov's face. My sweet son. It is time for you and I to say farewell, Kitna sounded and looked like she was going to cry. She winked at her son to silently communicate that all would be well and that they were not really going to part ways. No, Mommy. I want to stay with you, Zikalov cried and clung to her fiercely. Kitna turned around to meet Telariel's gaze and spoke softly so as not to scare her child. I will walk with you and carry him out of our home. It will be less stressful for the child if we go outside together. Telariel nodded in silent acceptance and followed them out into the night. A few lit lamps softly illuminated the housing section of their village. I will take your son now. Telariel outstretched her hands, ready to take Zikalov into her arms. Kitna, in what appeared to be sorrowful resignation, moved as if about to hand her son over peacefully to the Jedi. Then quite unexpectedly she screamed in rage and kicked the Jedi back with a well-executed roundhouse kick to Telariel's stomach and then a second kick to the stunned Jedi's face, giving her a head start in her desperate attempt to flee. Kitna turned and ran down the street screaming for help. Help! There is a Jedi trying to kidnap my son. There were about 12 warriors that patrolled around both the perimeter of the village and a few that even made their rounds through the streets. Kitna, desperate for help, turned a corner and looked back over her shoulder to see the Jedi was swiftly following her. As she ran through her village screaming, lights began to turn on as other residents were woken from the ruckus. There were a few male Kalish that left their homes, firmly commanding that all families remain indoors and guarded the remainder of Sheelul's family devoutly with weapons in hand. Kitna nearly tripped but regained her footing and whispered soothingly to her frightened son. Shh, there now, Zikalov, Mommy is going to protect you. It's going to be all right. At that moment, 4 Kalish warriors armed with swords and shoni spears cornered the Jedi and fought her. Kitna heard the sound of a lightsaber activating and continued to run. She fled to the border of their village and desperately cried to the Kalish warriors standing guard next to their village's protective energy fence that surrounded their town. You must protect my son. The Jedi have come to steal him away from Kali. The guards savagely snarled at this news and got into defensive stances. One of the 4 guards reached over to take her son from her. We swear by our honor that we will willingly forfeit our lives in the defense of your family. The guard's eyes flashed protectively behind his war mask, revealing his devout loyalty. They were caught by complete surprise when the Jedi Telariel somersaulted down from the rooftop of the nearest housing unit and crouched low with her green lightsaber raised defensively before her. Enough blood has been shed this night. Relinquish the boy peacefully or I will have no choice but to take him by force. You traitorous wretch! How dare you turn on your own kind and attempt the kidnapping of one of Sheelul's own sons? The guard standing protectively in front of Kitna yelled loudly in disdain. I am doing this for the greater good. You will all thank me for this someday. 3 of the guards charged the Jedi with loud battle cries and fought her. The guard holding Zikalov covered the child's eyes with his hand and told the child to cover his ears, as the screams of the wounded and dying warriors echoed loudly in the night. Soon, 3 bodies lay still beneath the moonlight. One of them with his last breath used the last of his strength and pulled out a small blaster pistol and pulled the trigger. The Jedi sensed the movement and used her lightsaber to deflect the blaster bolt where it bounced harmlessly off the green blade to return to the owner. The guard that had fired received the deflected shot that mercilessly ripped through his heart, leaving a smoldering hole. You're a monster! Kitna screamed as tears ran down her face. Zikalov had begun to sob in abject terror. The guard holding him returned the child to Kitna and activated the end of his spear that turned into an energy blade, similar to a lightsaber but not as powerful. He lasted longer than any of the other warriors. Kitna set Zekalov down and covered his head with the blanket. "Cover your ears, Zekalov, and do not come out from beneath this blanket until I return for you. I love you, my son." She then kissed the top of his head, for what would be the last time. Kitna picked up one of the fallen warrior's energy spears and got into a fighting stance as she witnessed the death of the last guard. The Kalish race were proud and never resorted to using modern-day technology such as blasters and energy weapons except in dire emergencies such as this one. The Kalish felt that it was more honorable to fight with what they considered to be real weapons despite the fact that many in the galaxy viewed them as archaic. Kitna glared daggers at the Jedi. "Why have you come for my son and not another of Sheelal's? Your son is unique and very special. He will rival the power and strength of his father. He will make the galaxy a better place." Kitna snarled angrily and pointed the glowing orange tip of the spear at her son's intended kidnapper. "I promise you that even if you kill me and take my son, his father will stop at nothing to take him back from the Kabramuti likes of you," Kitna hissed icily as she used one of the most dishonorable curses in the Kalish language that was meant only for the worst of traitors. Telariel looked almost sad and shook her head. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." With battle cries the two Kalish women clashed. Zekalov heard the loud noises of battle and whimpered. He couldn't help his childish curiosity and had to see what was happening. He peeked out beneath the blanket and with awe, watched his mother skillfully and deftly fight the evil Jedi that was trying to kidnap him. His mother's spear was knocked from out of her hand, and with a twirl and the flashing of a green light, it ended. The Jedi's back was to her opponent, the lightsaber blade brought swiftly backwards and plunged the energy weapon directly into his mother's stomach. Zekalov screamed in abject horror and reached his arms out towards his dead mother. "No. Mama." The small child sobbed and screamed his grief-stricken distress and kicked and struggled against the Jedi that reached down and captured him, blanket and all. His golden-hued eyes filled with water leaked them endlessly as he was carried further and further away from her still body. The shouts of more warriors ran from beyond the village, one of them crouching down beside his dead mother. "The Jedi killed Kitna. Kill the Jedi!" The warrior screamed in a grief-stricken rage. Tekar ran after Zekalov and the Jedi currently holding him, but the Jedi was too fast and knew Kali's terrain quite well. "No. No. Mama. Help me. Let me go." His struggles to be free intensified and the Jedi reached a hand to his forehead and released a burst of force energy into his mind. Zekalov's world went black. End flashback. Zekalov was unaware of where he was, but he returned to the real world screaming in absolute rage and felt the strongest bloodlust he'd ever felt in his life. He kicked and struggled as strong arms pinned him down. "You killed my mother." Zekalov screamed in absolute rage and felt the most hate he'd ever felt in his life as the remnants of the suppressed memory still lingered. "I hate you, Telariel." The sounds of vases exploding and glass cracking around the room filled his hearing, and Zekalov's swimming vision focused in on the two beings currently holding him down and restraining him. "Damn you. I'll kill you, Jedi scum." Slowly reality began to come to him and he began to snap out of it. He looked up into the panicked eyes of his father, Grievous's mask inches from his own face. "Zekalov. Son." Zekalov stopped his struggling and lay limp beneath his father. General Grievous had to use all four of his mechanical limbs to pin his son down before Zekalov could use his lightsaber to attack him. The boy broke down sobbing and his father gently let him go, his golden-hued eyes soft with concern. "Zekalov, what happened?" The boy angrily wiped the tears from his eyes and allowed his rage to override his anguished pain. He growled and retrieved his lightsaber from where it had rolled across the floor to the other side of the room and clenched both his jaw and his hands. "I'm going to go kill Ahsoka now, all of the Jedi have to die." Grievous grabbed his son before he could march angrily out of the door and spun the boy around. "It is not yet time to strike. You must think, boy, before you act, Grievous growled deeply, his eyes now a bit harsher although his concern was still there.
Father, I. A lump formed in his throat and he angrily turned his head away and snarled at the quaking battle droids to his right as he attempted to overcome his grief but was failing miserably.
He never did have the chance to grieve for his mother. The Jedi, those damnable Jedi, had done something to his mind after they had kidnapped him. They made him forget somehow. The boy felt drained of his energy and walked over to slide down one of the walls to the floor. He brought his knees up and wrapped his arms around his legs, lowered his head and cried. It was more of a cross between crying, snarling, and growling as his raging emotions swirled out of control. He was more than a little surprised when he unexpectedly felt his father slide down next to him. Zekalov kept his face buried in his knees and sniffled. Father, I remembered. I remember what they did to my mother. I hate the Jedi and swear I will not stop until I see every single last one of them dead. Zekalov raged his anger and his hurt, albeit muffled due to the clothing against his face. Zekalov felt a mechanical arm wrap around his smaller frame and pull him closer to Grievous's own body, and his father held him gently against him. When the general spoke, it wasn't gruff but almost sounded soothing. Son, I understand your feelings. I understand them well. Grievous was racked with a brief coughing fit that continued as soon as it was over. You must remember the day that I killed all of them, the ones who were responsible for kidnapping you. I avenged your mother's death. Zekalov raised his head and unbridled hate shone within them. I'm glad. But soon it will be my turn. I too will avenge her death. I've earned that right. Despite the fact Hilariel, that traitorous wretch, is now dead. You have more cause than most to hate the Jedi, Zekalov. Your time will come and revenge will be yours. You can start by killing Skywalker's Padawan. How does that sound? Zekalov met his father's eyes with his own identical ones. That has never sounded better. Father and son sat silently for a few moments as Zekalov finally calmed down. Zekalov took a few deep breaths and glanced over at his father with a frown. Father, please don't be angry with me, but we have a problem. What problem? Grievous's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Ahsoka knows I'm here. During my episode, I lost control of my Force ability to cloak my Force presence from her. This may change everything. I'm sorry. Zekalov lowered his head in shamed failure. Grievous, formerly known as Sheelal, gently turned his son's head so the boy could look at him. This changes nothing. I've already made necessary arrangements to disrupt the Jedi's activities. What sort of necessary arrangements? Zekalov raised a brow curiously. General Grievous chuckled darkly. This planet has chosen to join the Separatist Alliance and all local authorities have been notified to capture or kill the accompanying Republic dogs that are currently in Ahsoka's care. I've ordered that the Jedi be left entirely to you. Will we still meet them at the cantina? Zekalov got up from the floor and dusted his clothes off. His cyborg father did the same, well, minus the clothes part. Grievous nodded with eyes gleaming with a twisted delight. Of course. And I have a trap waiting for them once they arrive. Zekalov looked suspicious. Father, why does this sound far too easy? Grievous chuckled darkly again. That's because it is. The entire planet has now been turned against Ahsoka, the two spies, and the Separatist traitor. They have bounties on their heads now that they've become enemies of this system. Grievous pulled out a device from his cloak and tossed it up a few times and caught it. We can track them thanks to Centi 7's covert operation last night while our enemies slept. And their communications and transmissions have been jammed. They have no way to contact the Republic for a rescue. Zekalov stood incredulous. Father, you're a genius. You of all people should know that, Grievous growled stiffly in mock hurt. When he spoke next, his eyes were smiling and his fondness for the child crept through his voice as he gently grasped Zekalov's right shoulder. You inherited much from your father, boy. Including his intelligence. Be proud. Zekalov allowed himself a small smile, recognizing the compliment. Now that Ahsoka's communications have been jammed, she will have no choice but to meet the informant at the cantina on schedule. Zikaloff released a triumphant laugh. Yes. Rivas nodded the affirmative. Zikaloff looked at the chronometer on his wrist and grinned. In 2 hours and 13 minutes, our dear Republic friends will be nothing more than the shadow of a memory. Zikaloff's smile quickly disappeared and he looked at Grievous with concern. Father, you do realize that once I've slain Ahsoka, her master will seek revenge. The general nodded and a murderous glint entered his golden-hued eyes. Leave Skywalker to me. Zikaloff shrugged in acceptance. Fair enough. Rivas turned from his son and went to the table where he had left the bag of groceries and rummaged through it. He tossed his son a juba fruit and then handed the boy another food item that was native to Cali. The general had been a bit surprised when he stumbled upon the vendor that was selling it. Zikaloff sniffed it curiously before taking a bite of the rolled-up sandwich-type cuisine. His eyes widened and he hummed in clear satisfaction. This is really good. What is it? Rivas felt angry that his son had been robbed of his heritage but was happy and considered himself fortunate that he could teach his son. That back on Cali is known as queback. It is as similar to what humans call a gyro. Grievous watched his son eat it and was pleased to see his son enjoyed it immensely. Once it was all gone, the boy looked almost disappointed that there was no more. The expression on his son's face made Grievous laugh internally with some amusement. After finishing his meal, Zikaloff's eyes widened when he remembered something. I never tested it. Zikaloff unclipped the lightsaber he had constructed from his belt and ignited it. The red energy blade sprang forth with an energetic hum. He waved it around with a genuine smile to see the end result of his successful project. Rivas ignited one of his own and twirled it. It's time to practice. You need to be ready to defeat your Jedi opponent. This had to be the first time he had sparred with his father since he was sent to Count Dooku's lair a few years ago. He smirked and twirled his red lightsaber eagerly. Prepare to be defeated, father, Zikaloff snickered. Rivas narrowed his eyes and growled. Show me what you've got. With those words, both lightsabers clashed. Zikaloff knew he had to be at the top of his game. He would be facing his Jedi adversary in less than 2 hours. He grimly performed his lightsaber forms as his father evenly parried him. The boy had learned a lot while in Dooku's care. The Kalish child decided to mix it up, combining at least 3 different forms, and internally smiled when he saw the pride within his father's eyes. He warmed up for the fight and laughed inside. Ahsoka had no such luxury and would be out of her element when they met. Perfect. After a little while, Zikaloff paused in his duel with his father when he remembered something crucial. He gave his father a quizzical stare as he held the Mew Mew mask that he had outgrown and pointed to his father's face. Do you have an extra one of those? Chapter 16. Ahsoka reeled back from the great force disturbance emanating from the other side of the city. She had been searching for that masked force signature and was practically thrown back when it exploded. The Jedi Padawan was assaulted with dark, powerful emotions that echoed out from this unknown person. She had felt great anguish and pain. Among those, rage and hate had been the most prominent ones. She opened her eyes and narrowed them. The Sith apprentice was here. Soon the force disturbance simmered down and the signature was once again masked and shielded. Her raging paranoia urged her to take immediate action. The young Jedi ran next door and across the hall to inform the Republic spies of the situation, and the 3 stood and discussed this new event privately around a square dining room table in Ahsoka's quarters. The Sith apprentice that the Jedi Council has been searching for is here, right now in this city, Ahsoka whispered furiously, although she kept her emotions in check, keeping the fear out of her voice. The Jedi Padawan felt near panic but remembered her Jedi training and enhanced her inner calm. She honestly didn't know what she was supposed to do with this important knowledge. Perhaps you should contact the Jedi Council and inform them of this new development, Sylvan strongly suggested. That had been the first thing, naturally, that came to her mind. The Jedi Council needed to know about this. Dealing with the Sith apprentice was not a factor they were equipped to handle on this mission. They were to be covert and were not to draw attention to themselves or their cover would be blown. With a Sith apprentice running around on the loose, that might be a little difficult. Ahsoka took in a deep breath, allowing her tumultuous thoughts and nervous feelings to abate. She thought about it for a moment and came to a decision. "We need to have the captain send out a distress message," Ahsoka spoke firmly without any hesitation. She opened up a private and highly secure comm channel with the captain. "Captain Nudii, this is Ahsoka Tano. We need you to send the Jedi Council a Priority 1 distress message. The Sith apprentice we've been looking for is here in this city. Our mission may be compromised. We need the Council to immediately advise our situation." The DOS captain responded, although their communications line was laced with some mild static. "This is Nudii. In order for me to get the message out to the Council, I'm going to have to leave the city and take the ship up into the planet's exosphere. My communications transmitter array was built for mid-distance wavelengths and will need to be adjusted. It may take some time for me to get the message out that far." "We understand, Captain. Contact us as soon as you get the message through. We may need to carry out our mission regardless." Ahsoka, out. Captain Nudii acknowledged and their comlink channel was severed. "We have less than 2 hours to meet Greco at the cantina. We will give Captain Nudii until then to inform us if he managed to contact the Council. Otherwise we will meet Greco on schedule." Ahsoka was not happy with the prospect. Unfortunately for everyone involved, they had no means of contacting their separatist informant due to his safety. They could not risk exposure. Their mission was classified top secret. The irony of it all was not lost on the Jedi Padawan. Before arriving on Utapau, she had been jealous that her master Anakin had been assigned a mission that was considered above top secret. She had no reason to be jealous now. "You said yourself that the Sith boy is here in the city. He may have been sent to stop us." Frignell looked a little worried. "Or maybe he is here to kill Greco and prevent us from retrieving the data we seek," Sylvan spoke grimly. "I agree. This is most likely a trap. As much as I don't like it, we may have no choice but to proceed with our objective." Ahsoka's shoulders slumped as if being weighed down by a heavy burden. "Then what is our next course of action?" Ahsoka sat down heavily in a chair and massaged her temple. "We must prepare for the worst. If this is indeed a trap, we need to be ready." "What must we do?" Sylvan questioned. "We may need to plan an escape. Once we meet Greco and he gives us the data chip, we will need to leave the cantina, most likely through the back door instead of the front. Once we leave, the three of us need to split up and head back to the ship. Hopefully the captain will return to the landing dock before then to pick us up." "And if he doesn't?" The two spies entrusted in her care looked to her for guidance. Ahsoka clenched her hand into a fist and narrowed her eyes. "Then we find a different way off this rock." Ahsoka swallowed a lump forming in her throat and felt tears beginning to well in her eyes when she began to realize that the promise she made to the spies beforehand may now be nullified. "I'm afraid that since the arrival of the Sith apprentice some things may need to be changed." The two spies remained silent and listened intently to what she was going to say. "I can no longer guarantee your safety. I can however entrust one of you with the data and lead the Sith apprentice away if he chooses to appear. This may give you both the chance you need to escape and return to Republic High Command in one piece. I'm afraid that's the best I can do at this point." "We understand," Sylvan nodded with a smile forming as he and his accomplice clasped hands with the Jedi. "If we did not trust you, we would not have followed you here," Frignell nodded in what he hoped to be reassurance. "Now, all we can do is wait." The three sat down and did just that, hoping and praying for a potential miracle. Zekalov was quite proud of himself. He held up his new mask with newfound admiration. He ingeniously took both his old Mumu war mask and a spare droid-like mask that General Grievous constantly wore and combined the two into one with some modifications of course. He used red paint to enhance the look by applying war paint designs, mostly vertical and semi-horizontal stripes. The new mask was a perfect fit. He now felt both confident and ready enough to complete his mission. He put on his new war mask and got his father's attention. "So, what do you think?" Zikolov stood proudly with his hands on his hips. It was quite an accomplishment. This was the first war mask he had designed and made himself without any help. The very first had been crafted with Tekar's assistance back on Kali when he was 6 years old. Grievous nodded in approval. "I think you are ready." Zikolov rolled his eyes in annoyance. "Besides that?" The general tilted his head in confusion as he considered his son's question. "Besides what?" The Kalish cyborg stared pointedly at the boy, silently demanding that he elaborate. "How do I look?" "You look ready," Grievous growled in mild annoyance with a shake of his head at having been interrupted and turned back around to finish adjusting the vid screen set up for the both of them to watch, as well as to listen, to what was soon going to take place in the cantina. Zikolov was a little frustrated. He was now doubting himself. He was a bit disappointed that his father didn't give him any sort of compliment or praise for achieving such an extraordinary feat. "Did I design this wrong or something?" "What?" Grievous turned to look at him again in apparent confusion. Zikolov pointed a clawed finger to his own masked face. "Do I look anything like you?" The child sounded almost hopeful. Grievous's laugh soon turned into a hacking cough. "You look like my son," his father supplied with a smile in his golden-hued irises, and then turned his head away to stare intently at the surveillance screen. "And?" The boy was a stubborn one and wasn't about to let this go until he received the answer he was searching for. General Grievous glanced in his direction and rolled his eyes with a growl and ignored his son to focus his attention on his current task. This child of his was beginning to annoy him with all of his constant questions. Zikolov threw his hands up in the air in defeat with a small snarl and walked away and mumbled something under his breath that the sly general, unbeknownst to the boy, was able to hear. "Geez, he's nearly impossible sometimes." The general chuckled good-naturedly when the boy was out of earshot, but soon turned serious as he witnessed the telltale signs that Zikolov's foresight concerning the events within the cantina began to unfold before his eyes. The general of the droid armies stood upright from where he had been hunched over the computer terminal and took a moment to truly regard his son, finally getting a real good look at him. "It's nearly time. Are you ready?" Zikolov scoffed. I don't know. Do I look ready?" Zikolov intoned sarcastically as an aggravated growl built up within his throat. His father did frustrate him sometimes. The Kalish cyborg's first impulse was to snarl at the young boy in response to his sarcastic question. If it had been anyone else, he would have. Once again the father within him, the small caring side of him, suppressed the nearly overpowering feeling. Sometimes the gruff, Jedi-slaying warlord cursed his own weakness, but one look at his growing child erased that sentiment entirely. As much as he hated to admit it, he had come undone by his son. There was no criffing way he was going to let the rest of the galaxy know that, though. The true caring he felt for his boy was going to remain secret for as long as possible. "You are ready only if you believe you are." "Seriously? I was born ready," the boy replied confidently as he tossed his deactivated lightsaber hilt end over end a few times in his hand and expertly caught it with each nonchalant flip. Grievous nodded in reply and pointed a robotic claw at the terminal and growled deeply in eager anticipation. "Watch the vid screens. Our prey is approaching." Sure enough, on the screen, Ahsoka and the 2 Republic spies entered the cantina on schedule. Everything in the establishment happened in clear detail exactly as Zikolov had foreseen. As soon as Ahsoka knocked her drink over on the table to signal the all clear to the separatist spy, Zikolov was already springing into action. The boy jammed an internal comlink piece into his ear and synchronized the communications device with his father's. "I'm all set over here. What about you?" The plan had been simple enough. They were going to allow Ahsoka, the 2 spies, and the separatist traitor to leave, and lure them into a full sense of security. Once they made their enemies believe they had succeeded in their mission, Grievous and Zekalov were going to rob them of their supposed victory and watch them drown in their despair. Grievous was going to follow after the separatist traitor Greco and dispose of him secretly, while Zekalov trailed after Ahsoka. The two Republic spies were going to be taken care of by the 4B1 battle droids. The devious general had already paid the bartender D in the cantina to spike the Rhodians' drinks with a sleeping agent that would slow them down while they were on the run. Centi 7 was going to go back to their ship with their personal belongings and stand by for further instructions. Now that the planet was separatist-controlled, Grievous now had the jurisdiction to bring a whole separatist fleet to the system if necessary. Their plan was flawless. "I am almost ready," Grievous nodded after packing away their things and handed the luggage over to his son's guardian. Before they parted ways, the general towered over his son and placed his hands on his shoulders and looked him in the eyes. "Complete your mission and return to me." "I will, father." Zekalov was about to pull away to leave, but Grievous gently tightened his grip and stopped the boy. "Son, be careful," the general intoned with worry. His son was going to be facing his first real Jedi, alone. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine," Zekalov smirked beneath his mask as he sensed his father's genuine concern. Grievous looked down at the boy with something akin to admiration and pride. "You've come a long way, my son. Make your father and your people proud." "Yes, father, I will." Zekalov bowed respectfully to the general of the droid armies and turned his back about to leave. "And Zekalov?" His father's next few words halted his steps and brought a satisfied smile to his face beneath his warm mask. "You did well, my little warrior. You look intimidating," Grievous intoned with genuine sincerity and couldn't stop the affectionate lilt in his voice. Zekalov partially turned his head to glance back over his shoulder and nodded once in silent thanks and then hastened out of the door. They had a schedule to keep. General Grievous prayed to the gods that his son would stay safe. He would not be around to protect him this time. He knew he had to have faith in the boy. Zekalov was his son after all. The father recognized that his son had been trained well and could only hope for the best. "Come back to me, my son. I know victory will be yours." General Grievous sent out the order and their plans were set into motion. He stalked briskly out of the door, leaving his hooded disguise behind. He laughed in wicked delight as he did so. Now he had no more reason to hide. The Jedi Padawan and the two Republic spies were very disheartened when Captain Nudii didn't contact them in the time allotted. She had a feeling this would happen. Ahsoka and the two spies met Greco at the bar on schedule. Ahsoka remained on high alert and couldn't shake that paranoid feeling that they were being watched. The four of them spoke casually but soon got down to business and lowered their voices conspiratorially to discourage any potential eavesdroppers. "Here is the data chip with all of the schematics concerning the new droid models being manufactured as well as the locations of the separatist shipyards. You've done well. Thank you for this information. We are in your debt." Ahsoka bowed her head respectfully. She made copies of the data disks and kept a decoy for herself and gave the real copy to Sylvan. The four sipped on their drinks and appeared casual and spent another 10 minutes in the cantina so they wouldn't arouse suspicion. One by one they left the table. First Greco left the cantina after receiving his payment out the front door. Then she and the two Rhodians went out the back exit discreetly after paying for their drinks. "It's time to split up. Be careful." Sylvan grabbed the Jedi Padawan's wrist firmly and looked at her with some severity. "This was far too easy. I have a bad feeling about this." Ahsoka nodded and replied softly. "I know. Keep your weapon handy and head back for the ship, pronto." "Yes, my lady." She shouted one last thing. "And don't stop for anything, not even me." The Rhodian nodded in understanding, and with Ahsoka's last words of farewell Sylvan hurried off. She said farewell to Frignell, and once he was out of her line of sight, she closed her eyes and concentrated, using the Force to search for the Sith apprentice. Ahsoka didn't bother masking her Force signature and allowed her presence to shine as a beacon in the hopes the Sith apprentice would take the bait and come for her. She grinned sardonically when she felt him. He was coming for her. Good. She ran in the opposite direction of where her colleagues had fled and went deeper into the underground city. She laughed internally when she sensed him following her. So far the plan was working. Then something happened that froze Ahsoka in her tracks completely. The Sith apprentice force cloaked his signature again and disappeared off of her radar. It unnerved her greatly as she kept her eyes sharp as she scanned the bustling plaza she now found herself in. There was no sign of him anywhere. Then again, she honestly didn't even know what she was looking for. Then she both heard and felt it. A cry in the fabrics of the force that was swiftly silenced. Greco was dead. Her adrenaline pounded through her system and she ran in the direction of their ship. She tried to sense if the two spies had arrived there yet, but it felt like she was hitting some kind of barrier and couldn't sense either of her two charges. Was the Sith apprentice force blocking her? Such a thing was not unheard of. Ahsoka had never had to contend with something of this nature before, so was at a slight loss of what to do. She frantically opened up an emergency comlink channel with Sylvan and Frignell in order to warn them of the near and present danger before it was too late. She cursed beneath her breath when she discovered that their communications were being jammed. Sith spit. This was just great. What else could go wrong? She slid to a halt when she sensed the death of Frignell and cried out in dismay. No. This can't be happening. She ran with all haste. She prayed she'd get there in time. Her hopes were crushed when Sylvan's cry through the force was quickly silenced a few minutes later. The data was now at risk. Was the Sith apprentice the one who had just slain them? She soon found their bodies in a bustling part of the city where merchants had their wares out on display, both Rhodians with multiple blaster wounds to the chest. After further examination, her frown deepened. The precision of these blaster bolts were rather common, inflicted from none other than the rifles of battle droids. How could this be possible? Utapau was supposed to be neutral right now. Unless they had just recently decided to join the Separatist alliance. The Jedi Padawan surveyed the area and a growing sense that something was very wrong screamed at her through the force. None of the citizens in the area seemed frightened or even surprised that a murder just took place in public. Or even at the fact that Separatist battle droids may be patrolling nearby. Everyone in the immediate vicinity continued to go about their usual business, paying no mind to the Rhodians' soon-to-be cold, lifeless corpses. Their weapons and the data chips were missing. From the look of things, Sylvan had run back to help Frignell, only to meet a doomed fate himself. Arg. He should have known better. The data was more important. She stopped and analyzed the particular thought process. Since when did the success of a mission become more important than the lives of her comrades? She knew she had to track down the data chip and was stunned when she felt the Sith apprentice's force signature glowing angrily through the force, beckoning her to come find him. Her eyes widened in disbelief and she slid to a halt on the landing platform where their ship was supposed to be docked. Their ship wasn't there. A deep feeling of dread began to sink like a hard rock into the pit of her stomach, and icy cold fear began to grip her heart. She activated her comm channel with Captain Nudii and came to find that their communications were still being jammed. She had no means of contacting the ship to get her off this sinkhole of a planet. This can't be happening. A dark, amused-sounding voice echoed behind her. Just because it was the voice of a preteen, still didn't stop the small tingle of fear from creeping down her spine. Looking for this? She whirled around and jumped into a fighting stance, activating her green lightsaber as she did so. You. She wondered how old this boy was. If she had to hazard a guess, she would gauge him to be roughly around 13 years old, a couple years younger than herself. She knew that when it came to the mastery of the Force, age didn't truly matter. This boy radiated darkness and hate. Ahsoka was getting the feeling that this child was well trained and shouldn't be underestimated. The Sith apprentice had a Kaleesh war mask on that looked very similar to General Grievous's own and was wearing traditional Sith attire such as black pants and a matching long-sleeved tunic. He also wore a tabard over his tunic that was a dark, angry red with two thick black stripes that ran vertically down from each of his shoulders to his midsection, where his lightsaber was clipped firmly to his belt. The tabard had a medium-sized, circular white and black emblem on his chest with foreign designs, known only to the planet Kali, emblazoned on the front. It was the insignia worn by the Kalish elite guard. The tabard matched rather well with the rest of his black attire. Zikalov held the data chip up in his hand for her to see, the chip containing all of the vital intelligence that would have dealt a crippling blow to the separatist alliance that she and her accomplices had been so intent on stealing. It must be so devastating for you to have come so close to achieving your mission. Zikalov chuckled devoutly as he crushed the data chip within his 4-digit clawed hand. He dropped the crushed pieces to the ground and stomped the broken pieces with one black-booted foot for good measure, taking delight in the fact that he had just taken all of Ahsoka's hopes and permanently shattered them. He looked up at his Jedi adversary and unclipped his deactivated lightsaber hilt from his belt and gripped it firmly in his hand. He didn't activate it yet, however, and simply stood and regarded her in order to gauge her current emotional state. And failed. Zikalov finished his sentence with a great amount of satisfaction when he sensed the dark feelings of turmoil slowly building up within his enemy. "Who are you?" Ahsoka growled through gritted teeth as she defensively stood her ground. "I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Zikalov, the son of General Grievous. I've heard that all of you Jedi are out hunting for me. Well, here I am." He opened his arms wide as if inviting the entire Republic fleet as well as the Jedi Order to come for him. The boy continued with an amused, and yet rather dark, chuckle. "Congratulations, you found me." Ahsoka narrowed her eyes at him but remained firmly silent. She appeared to be internally debating on whether or not to speak. Zikalov continued, clasping his hands serenely behind his back and stood with his head held high. "You know I would be a great prize if you were able to take me back alive with you before your precious Jedi Council. Perhaps that would help restore a minute fraction of your shattered ego and serve as a means to compensate for your devastating failures and extreme incompetence here on Utapau." Ahsoka growled angrily at him and twirled her lightsaber in anticipation of the fight. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Sith scum," Ahsoka shouted angrily as her eyes briefly flickered down to the shattered data chip pieces and then focused all of her attention on the Sith boy. "How do you figure that?" Zikalov crossed his arms and stood in a rather relaxed posture and smiled inwardly as he sensed Ahsoka's internal anger begin to boil. She was dangerously close to losing her control. "You would have done no less if our roles had been reversed, Ahsoka Tano." The Jedi Padawan stiffened at the use of her name and glared daggers at him. "If our roles had been reversed, Zikalov," she spat his name like a curse before continuing. "I at least wouldn't have been too cowardly to confront my enemies face to face rather than sending battle droids in to do the dirty work for me. I felt your need to confront me face to face. I am here to honor your invitation. The Rhodians, sadly, are simply casualties of war. There is much you do not know about me, Jedi filth. Soon you shall, and you will wish you never had." Zikalov activated his glowing, crimson blade with a snap hiss that electrified the very air with pulsating heat and stood defiantly at the ready and waited for his opponent to make the first move. It would be much easier to dispatch her if Ahsoka fought him with raw emotion rather than reason. He could sense how heavily the weight of her failed mission crushed her and that she was indeed angry for this particular outcome. "You must be wondering where your ship has gone. He's not coming back, you know." Zikalov grinned with wicked delight beneath his mask. Ahsoka narrowed her eyes but kept silent, allowing the Sith apprentice a chance to explain himself. "The captain of your ship, Nudii, was it? He was paid quite handsomely and no longer wishes to participate in the remainder of your mission. Unfortunately for you, his allegiance is now with us after he came to learn that the Separatist Alliance pays twice as much as the Republic. You are hopelessly alone, Ahsoka. No one, not even your master, is going to save you now." The Jedi Padawan silently fumed and glared daggers at him with a deep frown and refused to allow him to gain the upper hand by tempting and baiting her to give in to the dark feelings stirring within her. She breathed deeply and evenly and tried to use a Jedi calming technique but found it extremely difficult, especially at what the Sith apprentice said next. I'm also afraid that you are now one of the biggest failures in the galaxy. Not only were you unable to retrieve the data and complete your mission, but you failed to save your comrades entrusted under your protection. They are dead now because of you. Who would ever want to be protected by the mighty Ahsoka Tano now? Zikaloff rubbed in her extreme lack of success and greatest of failures. Shut up. Just shut up and fight me. Ahsoka screamed angrily, finally losing her control, and lunged for him with a twirl of her green lightsaber. Zikaloff met her saber with his own crimson energy blade. They clashed and locked sabers, and Zikaloff smirked at her beneath his mask. It will be quite disappointing to return to your master only to tell him what a failure you are. Zikaloff laughed darkly when Ahsoka screamed in outrage and assaulted him with the flurry of her lightsaber. Many of the moves and techniques he himself already knew thanks to Count Dooku's merciless instruction. They were evenly matched. It surprised Ahsoka that this child was so skilled. Zikaloff merely blocked, ducked, and parried her attacks and grinned inwardly as she used all of her strength in a savage attempt to defeat him. He was allowing his enemy to act on the offensive and simply observed through their duel the amount of energy she was aggressively burning as the Jedi's anger reigned dominantly for the first half of their match. Soon, Ahsoka began to exhibit signs of tiring, and she used the Force to backflip away from him and attempted to Force push him backwards. The Sith boy merely reached a hand out and with an enraged snarl sent his own Force push, and both energy waves crashed against each other, sending a highly concentrated burst of Force energy that rippled out like an invisible shockwave. The two combatants were sent flying backwards from the explosive effect. Zikaloff regained his footing by sliding backwards with legs crouched and his hands out in front of him, and swept the floor with his fingers, using them to halt his momentum. Ahsoka backflipped into a crouch with her green lightsaber held defensively in front of her. You have unleashed your anger, Ahsoka. It feels good, doesn't it? Zikaloff's smirk echoed in his haughty voice. Shut up. Ahsoka growled but made no move to attack him again as she panted for air from all of the exertion. Zikaloff simply regarded his opponent and scanned her for a weakness. He soon found it. What would your Master Skywalker think of you, if he knew how dangerously close you have come to using the dark side? Ahsoka's angry face changed to one of guilt. She hadn't meant to use her anger in the fight and beat herself up for this particular failure. Her opponent, Zikaloff, seemed to intimately know what she was thinking and feeling. It freaked her out because the only two people in the galaxy that she knew could sense and read her so well were Master Skywalker and Jedi Master Plo Koon. She did everything she could in that moment to put a lid on her simmering anger, but this Sith boy knew how to push her closer to the edge of succumbing entirely to the beckoning darkness. Your mission was doomed from the start, my dear Ahsoka. Zikaloff slowly began to advance on her and laughed inwardly to see her slowly succumb to her doubt and fear as she backed away from him. She looked paranoid and distrustful, completely clueless to what his next move might be as he drew ever nearer. As a matter of fact, I've spoken to your master Anakin. He knows of your current plight but is a little indisposed at the moment, and I'm afraid he's going to be far too late to save you. Zikaloff snickered in wicked delight as if he had already won this battle. Zikaloff, why are you doing this? I am doing this because I absolutely hate you Jedi. You are all evil monsters who absolutely deserve to die. The same could be said of all of you Sith. You know nothing of love, compassion, or mercy. All you do is hate. Ahsoka huffed in clear disdain. You know nothing concerning these matters. The only real difference between you and me is that I am actually allowed and encouraged to feel emotions besides just hate. All you are, Ahsoka, is a damn droid. You Jedi are the ones who aren't even allowed to feel or even love according to your damnable Jedi code. So if anyone is ignorant of love and mercy, it's you. Zikaloff growled in deep loathing. Count Dooku has poisoned you with lies and deceit. The boy stopped his approach for a moment and regarded her silently again. He briefly turned his head away and appeared almost sorrowful, in Ahsoka's opinion. When his golden irises met her own, they were narrowed in anger as he tightened his grip on his lightsaber hilt. "That's where you are wrong. Count Dooku has nothing to do with any of this. It's about history. A history that the Jedi have concealed from the rest of the galaxy. It was the Jedi's fault for the starvation, enslavement, and death of my people. If anyone has been brainwashed with lies and deceit, it's you." Zekalov snarled in rage as his dark emotions began to swirl around his very being in a whirlwind of barely contained fury. "I'm sorry for what happened to your people, but that has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you," Zekalov screamed in rage. Without warning, the Sith apprentice released his full-blown fury upon the unsuspecting Ahsoka, nearly catching her off guard. They resumed lightsaber combat, only this time, Zekalov was the aggressive one. He mercilessly pummeled her with a flurry of strong and very controlled lightsaber attacks. He swung his lightsaber in a nearly successful move that would have removed Ahsoka's head from her shoulders had she not ducked in time. Zekalov cursed beneath his breath and used all of his hate to fuel his power, and felt deeply satisfied when Ahsoka weakened considerably in the wake of his dark, full-blown fury. The Jedi was struggling to deflect and parry his strikes, and they locked lightsabers again. Ahsoka's arms shook from the strain and sweat dripped down the sides of her face. She gritted her teeth and managed to ground out something else that nearly threw Zekalov off his game. "Zekalov, you are free to choose your own destiny. You don't have to remain a slave to the Sith. You can be free. I can promise you that someday I will be. You can be damn sure that the Jedi won't be responsible for that. You can despair with the knowledge that I will be the death of the Republic and the entire Jedi Order." The Kalish boy used all of his strength to push Ahsoka back in an attempt to disengage from the saber lock. Her feet began to slide backwards as the force of Zekalov's strength began to overpower her. With a quick move and a flash and blur of light, Ahsoka found herself on the flat of her back. The sound of a scream ripping its way painfully out of her throat sounded foreign to her own ears. She felt agonizing pain as the smell of scorched flesh began to fill her nostrils. Zekalov stood victoriously over his fallen foe with a crimson lightsaber tip pointed near her neck. Ahsoka struggled to move and felt that he had succeeded in paralyzing her by cutting one leg and an arm, leaving deep gashes, but he hadn't severed her limbs. He had only wounded her to the point that she was now helpless and at his mercy. Why hadn't he killed her outright when he had the chance, or even mortally wound her in his bloodthirsty rage? The Jedi Padawan found that extremely odd. "Any last words before I finally end you?" Zekalov growled darkly. Ahsoka's words died on her lips as her eyes darted to something behind Zekalov. The cry was stuck in her throat, and she refocused her attention on the Sith boy, hoping he hadn't seen her do so, but Zekalov had noticed her look behind him. The Sith apprentice's gold reptilian eyes widened in shocked disbelief when he felt the danger approaching behind him through the Force. He heard the sound of a lightsaber activating and whirled around, leaving Ahsoka on the floor. "Impossible!" the boy shouted in complete shock. Zekalov's saber met the green blade of a strange-looking creature. He was green-skinned with large black eyes and had a head of tentacle-looking things hanging down like hair. If the boy had to hazard a guess, he would think that this creature was aquatic by nature. He engaged in lightsaber combat with the strange Jedi. He didn't allow himself to be intimidated by his opponent's larger size compared to him, and ignored the fact that this Jedi was an adult. This event he had never foreseen. What in the criffing hell is this Jedi doing out here? How did he know Ahsoka was in trouble? The Jedi rarely come this far into the Outer Rim, and Utapau has never harbored or even willingly allowed Jedi to come to this planet. The son of Grievous knew that Skywalker knew of his Padawan's plight and had most likely requested a different Jedi go rescue her for him. Zekalov snarled in rage when this new Jedi robbed him of the chance to finish Ahsoka off. "How dare you intervene, Jedi scum! You shall not rob me of my victory!" Zekalov raged as he attacked this new Jedi with everything he had. While the Sith apprentice was busy dueling with Master Kit Fisto, Ahsoka called her fallen lightsaber back to her hand with the force from where it had rolled away a couple of yards away. She desperately wanted to help the Jedi Master but had a feeling that she was currently useless. She grimaced and whimpered in pain when she tried to move. It was a deep, burning, and aching pain. When she moved her arm and leg, it felt like white-hot knives were piercing through the injuries she had sustained. With tears forming in her eyes, she struggled to sit up but weakly fell back down with an anguished cry. Zikalov's lightsaber had most likely cut through some major nerve endings, vital muscles, and tendons, resulting in her semi-paralyzed condition. She moaned as she tried to drag herself across the floor, but the pain was too intense. Ahsoka lay still and watched through blurry vision the vicious lightsaber duel between Zikalov and Master Kit Fisto. The son of Grievous soon sensed as well as observed that this new adult had to be a Jedi Master. He had a calm air about him and skillfully and effortlessly parried every move that Zikalov made. It was kind of strange that this Jedi was merely blocking his attacks and not really attacking him. Why wasn't he? It almost seemed as if the Jedi had no intent of hurting him at all. The boy felt a bit aggravated that this Jedi was putting him in his place as a master would instruct a student. The longer Zikalov fought this Jedi, the more childish and foolish he felt. His face burned with shame as he realized he was no match for this Jedi Master. This isn't fair. This wasn't supposed to happen. He could handle Ahsoka just fine. But not this. Zikalov hated himself for not foreseeing this unexpected event. Why hadn't he? Did the Force conceal this from him? He faithfully meditated every day as his master had instructed him. Often enough he could access and control future Force visions. Then why didn't he see this one? Zikalov's golden-hued eyes widened in disbelief when he heard, felt, and saw a small garrison of clone troopers zipline down from a hovering gunship. The ship didn't land on the landing pad right away for some reason. This merely served to further confuse the Sith boy. Zikalov snarled in rage when he saw the troopers run to where Ahsoka was and lift her up into their arms. The boy would have force-pushed the troopers down to prevent them from rescuing her, but he was currently saber-locked with the Jedi Master. The Sith apprentice howled in absolute fury when the troopers succeeded in tucking her safely away into the gunship. No. She was mine. Zikalov was lost in both rage and despair as he watched his victory slip through his fingers. Zikalov growled deeply when he noticed that this master hadn't even broken a sweat and was showing no signs of tiring anytime soon. Truthfully, the boy was growing tired himself after his duel with Ahsoka. He had never in his wildest imagination expected or foreseen himself battling a Jedi Master. General Fisto, Ahsoka Tano is safely aboard. What are your orders? A clone trooper questioned a few yards away. The Jedi Master smirked as he relayed his next order. The son of General Grievous must be captured alive. Set your blasters for stun and detain him. The remaining troopers, about 20, encircled Zikalov and the Jedi he was currently battling. Fear and dread began to grip the boy when he began to understand the situation he was currently in. These Jedi were going to kidnap him and take him as a prisoner. Before he had a chance to react, the Jedi Master somersaulted backwards and sent a force push and succeeded in knocking Zikalov down. The frightened child tapped the comlink piece in his ear to send a brief static burst that for all intents and purposes was an encrypted SOS signal to his father. The boy heard the clicking sounds as the troopers set their rifles for stun blasts. He gritted his teeth and hissed icily in stubborn defiance. You will never take me alive. The troopers began to fire. Zikalov used the force and managed to block many of the blasts. He deftly used his lightsaber to send a few stun blasts back to the intended recipients responsible for issuing the shots. After a couple of minutes he was left with just 15 troopers. One of the stun blasts hit his right leg and dropped him down to the ground as he lost feeling in that extremity. The boy somehow knew that he was not going to win this battle. Zikalov's rage and fear escalated, and then something rare occurred that no one, with the exception of his father when he had first found him on Yavin years ago, had ever witnessed before. The air around Zekalov began to condense and ripple around his body as the boy drew force energy towards him. He was lifted partially off of the ground and felt some of the troopers' stun blasts bounce harmlessly off of the protective force bubble he was currently curled and tucked away in. Then, with a heart-wrenching scream filled with both hate and despair that was fueled by a complete act of desperation, the boy released the force energy in a powerful shockwave. He successfully force-repulsed all of the troopers away from him and fell to the floor as the last of his energy drained away. He weakly struggled to get back up, but one of the troopers that had recovered more quickly than his comrades got a lucky shot in with his stun blaster. Zekalov fought the deep urge to close his eyes and succumb to blissful oblivion, but his stubbornness prevented him from actually giving in. He began to crawl up to his knees and heard cries of disbelief from a couple of the clones, but his world went completely dark when he was hit with 3 more stun blasts that finally rendered him unconscious. Master Fisto nodded in approval and made a hand gesture for one of the clones to approach the unconscious Sith boy. They shackled him in force-dampening restraints by slapping cuffs on both of his wrists and feet. They carried his unconscious body into the gunship. Master Kit Fisto swept the immediate area with keen eyes to ensure that there had been no witnesses, and once satisfied that they were in the all-clear, he boarded the gunship himself. The doors of the gunship closed and they blasted away at full speed to rejoin the lone Acclamator-class Republic cruiser awaiting them in orbit. Once they landed within the Republic assault ship, Jedi Master Kit Fisto gave the order and their ship jumped to lightspeed immediately, leaving the planet of Utapau. And unbeknownst to them, the boy's despairing father behind.